Welcome, everyone, to an evening with Sasha taqʷšəblu LaPointe. Magandang gabi, good evening. Ang pangalan ko ay Rebecca Mabanglamayor at ako ay isang librarian sa Lummi Library sa Northwest Indian College. My name is Rebecca Mabanglamayor, and I'm a librarian at the Lummi Library at Northwest Indian College. It's important that we begin tonight's program by acknowledging that we gather on the territory that has been the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Squamish, the Lummi people, the Nooksack people, and other Coast Salish tribes of this region since time immemorial. We honor our shared responsibility to this land, to these waters. We commit to learning from Indigenous wisdom, and we strive to repair and deepen our relationships as neighbors and friends. Maraming salamat po. Thank you. This year marks the 16th anniversary of Whatcom Reads, our community-wide reading program. Since the beginning, Whatcom Reads has been a team effort co-presented by the Bellingham Public Library, Bellingham Technical College, Northwest Indian College, Western Washington University, Whatcom Community College, the Whatcom County Library System, and of course, our community partner, Village Books. We would like to thank Allied Arts of Whatcom County for coordinating the Whatcom Reads Arts Challenge, and special thanks to Hotel Leo for providing lodging for our author. We're also grateful to the writers who submitted their work for the Whatcom Writers Anthology, now available at Village Books and available for checkout from any of our local libraries very soon. Major funding for Whatcom Reads comes from the Friends of the Bellingham Public Library, the Whatcom County Library Foundation, and the Whatcom County Library System, with additional support from Western Libraries and Bellingham Technical College Foundation. And if you bought a copy of Red Paint from Village Books, please know that a percentage of the proceeds will go towards supporting next year's program. If you buy a copy of Legacies, the Whatcom Writes Anthology, 100% of the proceeds, after printing costs, goes to Whatcom Reads. This has been a busy, invigorating Whatcom Reads season, with programs about preserving the Nooksack language, writing family portraits, translating family stories into songs, learning how Native values can teach resilience, and celebrating the achievements of Vi Hilbert, Sasha's great-grandmother, who's credited with rescuing the Lushootseed language from the brink of disappearance. After Sasha speaks, I will ask her questions submitted by our audience, and then you will have an opportunity to have Sasha sign her books for you. Now, it is my honor to introduce the author you are all here to see. Sasha taqʷšəblu LaPointe is from the Upper Skagit and Nooksack Indian tribes. As a child, she lived on the Squamish Reservation. As her mother used to tell her, "You come from a long line of strength." Sasha writes about herself and her ancestors, multiple generations of resilient, formidable women in her raw, vulnerable, and ultimately hopeful book, Red Paint, an ancestral autobiography of a Coast Salish punk. Sasha earned an MFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts. Her writing has appeared in many publications, from the Rumpus Literary Journal to Indian Country Today, online at Huffington Post and Hunger Mountain, and anthologies like Shapes of Native Nonfiction. Sasha primarily writes creative nonfiction and poetry. Her books include Red Paint, Rose Quartz, which is a collection of poetry, and her latest, Thunder Song, an essay collection. Sasha freely admits to strange obsessions with Twin Peaks, Sasha dolls, and mermaids. Her love of punk music and the fact that she's been a longtime member of punk bands, including Medusa Stare, just may make her one of the coolest authors we've ever had the pleasure of celebrating with Whatcom Reads. Please join me in welcoming Sasha taqʷšəblu LaPointe.
Gulapu Deishad Ischalchuv Siab Siaya taqʷšəblu Seedsta Twal Nuksak Gwalskadget. Hello, welcome everyone. It's such an honor to be here with you tonight. Thank you for being here. You are dear friends, and I'm honored to share this space with you. My name is Sasha taqʷšəblu LaPointe, and I am from Nooksack and Upper Skagit. I feel like this is an ongoing thing, but I have to do it every time. I drink a lot of beverages up here because my mouth gets so dry. It's just a thing. It's weird. I've tried to work it out. I've looked into different, I've tried lozenges, there's all kinds of things, but nothing helps except drinking water or coconut water. So I drink a lot of water, and that's a little bit awkward and strange, but it's kind of fun. It's like, whoa, have you ever drank water in front of a room full of strangers? It's so weird. So we're in this together, and it'll just be a thing, but it helps, I promise. So I want to begin by saying that I'm so honored, and I feel really blessed to be here today. I was talking to my dear friend Kari today. We're walking around downtown Bellingham, and I was like, this is so cool and weird, like in the best way, that as a writer, I'm able to come share my story with you all, that you guys cared enough to read it. It's just like, my hands are up to you in thanks and gratitude. Like, this has been really, truly incredible, so thank you. I'm gonna share a little bit of a craft talk. This is about my process. I was thinking about, okay, everyone just read, for Whatcom Reads Red Paint, right? So that story hopefully is fresh in your mind. And I thought I would share a little bit about what that was like for me and what guided me through it. Because to be honest, I would not be sitting here today had it not been for the stories of the women who came before me. And that's honest, that's real. This is a hilarious photo of me as a child. I'm missing a tooth. I'm sitting on my great-grandmother's lap, and I'm sitting at her beach property on the peninsula, out by Kingston, where I used to spend summers camping and hanging with family. And honestly, it's some of my favorite memories. So that's why I chose this image to start us off, because truly, the stories of these women, my connection to not only my great-grandmother and this woman, Kamsha Kohalolish, who was so important, who I talk about in the book often, but it's also my mom, my grandmother, my cousins, my aunties. It's these women that were around me, and their stories that that truly made red paint possible. So I'm going to go into a craft talk about that, and then I'm going to read a little bit from Red Paint, maybe, or just Thundersong, the new book of essays. Thank you so much for being here. We're having our first water break. Figure it out. The stories that guide us. I'm a writer who thought she absolutely hated the research side of things. It's true. All throughout my undergrad and even into my MFA, I would groan about any deep digging or research-related projects that I had to do. But now I love it. It's something I get really pumped about. Who knew I would turn into that lady who was really, really excited to spend an entire day in the tiny town of El Waco in their small library, cooped up in their historical society section. But that's kind of what happens when we're falling into a story that we love, a story that guides us, gives us strength, when we're having a rough go of it. When I began the work of red paint, both spiritual and mental, the work of writing and healing, I had zero intention of falling down that rabbit hole of research, but that's what happened. Whoops. But I'm so glad it did, because anchoring myself to the stories of the women who came before me is truly the only thing that got me through it. I knew I'd write about my grandmothers, the women who helped raise me. But as I learned more and more about the woman called Sasha taqʷšəblu and began to see the strength and the resilience that she had, she became a beacon I had to follow, and I'm so thankful that I did. Because I learned so much about our tribe's history, the history of the territory, the settler colonial trauma, the Hudson Bay Trading Company, and the smallpox epidemic that ravaged our ancestral lands. I learned more about the man called Captain James Johnson, who married my ancestor, only to receive twice the allotment of land granted to any white settler marrying a Native person. I learned about the shack he built on the edge of the property line, the one he made her live in because Natives weren't allowed in white households at the time. But above that, I learned so many beautiful things about who Kamsha was. I learned about her strength as the sole survivor when smallpox wiped out her entire village. She was only 9 years old. I found poems written by her daughter that spoke of the power and beauty of the wild blackberry. I learned she was one of the first Coast Salish women to be a school teacher in that Chinook territory. So I chose to tether myself to the stories of these women, specifically their strength, because I needed it. And here's why. I feel like I always bring this up, and it's never simply to roast myself or be self-deprecating. It's because I think it's really important to talk about failure. And it's something I wish artists, musicians, writers were more open about. We can learn a lot from our failures. I did. I wrote the draft of a failed memoir. Little Boats was my story, but it was always missing something. It was an account of every bad thing that had happened to me. It was a sad story. There was nothing grounding the reader in it, because there was nothing grounding me. I needed, in order to write Red Paint, I needed help in order to write Red Paint. I needed to quiet myself and listen. I needed to listen to the stories of the women who came before me, and I needed to listen to my own tribe's teachings to remind myself I come from strength. When things get too hard as writers, as we muck around in the most challenging memories and the trauma of what we have been made to endure, it helps to link ourselves to the bigger stories, the larger stories, stories that came before us, stories that can teach us something, and most of all, stories that give us strength. So I forgot to move through the slides because I'm not nervous at all. So when I first started the work of red paint, this first image is of my book on the very first night that it was like my informal book launch years ago in Portland. Kari and I, my bandmate, we were playing a show at the Coffin Club, I think. And my dear friend, Hadogaji, who is an amazing artist, we went to school at the Institute of American Indian Arts together. They were like, can I come and like help out and sell books? And I was like, what? Like, no, cool, yeah. And they did. They showed up, and I was like, this is like a punk show. Like, we're literally just like, it was very DIY, very like the official launch wasn't for a few days after that, but Hadogaji showed up, and they made me this beautiful sign with a sharp and a piece of cardboard, and took this photo and all these little Polaroids that you see on the side. So that was just to commemorate that and the birth of that book in the world, and to know that I shared that with another Indigenous badass, like fierce femme artist. It was very cool. The photo opposite is the first time I ever went to taqʷšəblu LaPointe's house in Owako. And so, yeah, I think I started this craft talk with, I don't like research. And then here I am, like, this was my first time being there, and all of a sudden I was struck with this need to know more. And I think that that is true and can carry over to so many of our stories. Like, something you have gone through, something you've done, like, don't you want to learn more about that and where that comes from? That happened to me. I was sitting there and I was like, whoa, she lived here. And then I basically lived in El Waco for like a week. It was weird. It was cool. So those are the photos. What else did I miss? This is three photos. One is Myrtle Woodcock, Myrtle Johnson, Myrtle Woodcock Johnson, and then taqʷšəblu LaPointe and my great-great-grandmother, Louisa Anderson. And these were the women that while going through a really hard time, I don't know how many folks have actually read Red Paint, but it's a to move through. It was not an easy thing to navigate, to write, to turn into a thing. And I feel like I owe it to these women that I'm able to be up here and being like, wow, I live in Bellingham for a few days. This is cute. I love it. I owe them. Like, they helped me. They guided me. Their strength, their resilience. The more I learned from the women who came before me, the more I believed I could heal. That's such a huge part of Red Paint. So I wanted to focus this talk on the stories that guide us. Like, whatever we're writing, whatever the stories we're trying to tell, there's knowledge and wisdom that we can learn from and grow from. So personally, I pull from stories as a coach woman, the stories I grew up with, and I want you guys to think, everyone in the audience, to kind of think about what are the stories that you grew up with, right? Like, they're going to be very different than mine, but surely they taught you something. They had an impact, even if it's like a fairy tale or a beloved like bedtime story. What are the stories that really had an impact on you? And I'd like you to think about that, and think about what they can teach you, how they can guide you. This is a photo of my great-grandmother, and a photo of me and Mama Kia, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother. So in my current project, the project that just came out, Thunder Song, well, it just came out like last Tuesday. That's so weird. Thank you. Thank you. It's a collection of essays that I'm turning to our Lachute Seed stories for strength and guidance. Like it's something, after Red Paint, I still do this, right? I still look to our ancestral stories and wisdom for guidance. It really is so awkward to drink in front of a room full of people. It's just like, that's weird. Thanks for being here with me. I'll talk about this later, but one of the stories that shows up in Thundersong and something that I'm focusing on is our basket ogress or basket woman story. As a Native woman and as a survivor, the missing and murdered Indigenous women movement is really hard for me to write about. And I started working on this essay because, of course, I wanted to say something about that. I had this really intense, kind of beautiful moment, like with a friend. We're having conversation, and she said, for folks who have read Red Paint, I'm going to put her on blast right now. It's Tanya, who made my dentalium earrings and said, we wear them to remember we're loved. So she's fierce. That's all you need to know. She's amazing. She is like my Yoda. But one day walking in, I was like, yeah, someone asked me to write an essay about the missing and murdered Indigenous women movement, and I'm having a hard time with it. It's a hard thing to research, obviously. It's a hard thing to be in and try to talk about. And also I was like, I know nothing of this. Like, this is just hard and re-traumatizing. And she stopped me and she goes, you wrote Red Paint. Like, you were almost that. Like, you have lived that. Like, and that shook me to my core in this way that I was like, and instead of being like, oh, you did, like, she was like, you step up. Like, she was like, step up and write this and research it and be okay, because you were one of these women. And I was like, wow. So anyway, I promise it'll get more cheery later, I think, I hope. So as a Native woman, as a survivor, the missing and murdered Indigenous women movement is hard for me to write about. But it is an important story to write about, to explore. How can I find strength to return to the page? And I'm hoping that there are writers in the room that maybe are struggling with your own story and how to access it and how to find strength. And that's kind of what this whole talk is about. So I go back to my great-grandmother's story. I find the strength in the basket woman story. I let that story be my anchor, my safe harbor, as I write through the storm. Some of my favorite, I don't know if you guys recognize this image, but it's from The Never-Ending Story. Artax, when Artax goes down, like, I feel like there's a whole generation of us who are traumatized from that. I was. In the swamp of sadness, I was like, a poet wrote this movie. A poet wrote this movie. So, some of my favorite authors rely on the stories that came before them in order to tell their own, especially when the writing is difficult or traumatic. When folks come to me and they're like, oh, I want to write a memoir too, and I'm like, okay, do you have a good support system? Do you have a therapist? Do you have, like we need all these things, because I think that sometimes, even though our stories are important and so valid and need to be told, we need a lot. They're hard. They're the swamp of sadness. So that's why I chose that image. But in thinking about stories that guide us, I have to bring up one of my dear friends, Julie and Gunn, like forever sibling, sister, love. Julie and Gunn is amazing. They are a Indigenous Chamorro writer from Guam, and they're also, like, they're so impressive. I, like, kind of freak out about them. If they called me the other week and I was like, oh my God, we're friends, what? They're a lawyer, they're an Indigenous people's rights lawyer, an environmentalist lawyer, like all of these things. And then are one of the most beautiful writers I've ever had the privilege of reading. No Country for Eight Spotted Butterflies is a gorgeous lyric memoir. So if you like poetry, if you like memoir, this is the book for you. But I want to talk about specifically, my mouth is already dry, I don't know why. It just bends, I don't know, bodies are weird. In thinking about stories that guide us, like I gave the example of tethering myself to my lineage, the women who came before me, their strength, right? This is an example of Juliana Gunn that I want to share because I think as soon as I read this book, I was like, that is the thing that I'm drawn to and inspired by. So I think I just have an excerpt. Okay, so in this book, he is talking a lot about climate change. He's talking about the colonization of Guam. He's also talking about the death of his father at a young age and him kind of having to grapple with grief at like 9 years old. But there's this really, really beautiful essay called Yuzu Means Yoke that is about him, I think in 3rd grade. My friend gave me a note the other day and was like, make your disclaimers quicker. So I'm workshopping that, we're trying. This essay is so gorgeous because like I, of course, don't know what it's like to lose your father at 9 years old to cancer. He does though, and he's writing about it. But at the very end of the essay, it takes a shift in this way that he shifts the focus from himself and what that was like to his sister. And I think it's a really beautiful moment. So I'm just going to share an excerpt and I'll read my weird little notes also. Why do I put notes right here? Like, you know what? It's cool. It works. So our stories are never just our own, even when we think they are. Who else is experiencing this story? Who's with you? Oftentimes, it can be as simple as looking around the room, around your own story, your own experience, and noticing the other people who are there with you. What happens when we zoom in on their experience instead of our own? And this is kind of what I'm talking about in Yuzu Means Yoke. Like, the essay is gorgeous and like heartbreaking, and we're through it, like, but then the end takes this turn and is really striking. So I'm just gonna share it. Thank you to Juliana Gunn, you're amazing. So up until now, all you need to know is that he's sharing about being 9 and running around the hills behind his house and kind of thinking about grief for the first time and thinking about the loss of his father. And it's heartbreaking and intense. But then he has made mention of his sister wearing his dad's T-shirts and like these oversized T-shirts because that was her way of dealing with the grief. So that's all you need to know. My friend was right. So a big disclaimer. We all bore that heaviness, my sister most of all. I know this because once, when I was 10 and she was 11, I found her outside in the middle of the night wearing nothing but my dad's old shirt, which she had washed one too many times and which, she said, no longer smelled like him. Though it had been only 1 year since he died, I was beginning to be able to recognize the signs. I could see the emptiness in her eyes. I changed my prayer right then and there. I prayed for her wings, not mine. So this like really beautiful moment, right, where it's a memoir essay, it's a short piece about his own loss of his father, but he shifts and looks at his sister, and it's like, whoa, that's the moment that, so yeah, stories that guide us. Like, he tethered himself to that story. My next example is from Tay Tibble, an amazing Maori poet. Oh, I had a whole thing. Tay Tibble is a Maori poet and who wrote Pocahontas. She has a new book coming out, and she's just incredible. We had the opportunity to read together at several events last year. She came and stayed with me in Tacoma at my house, even though she was like, I'm supposed to go to LA, but I don't want to. And I was like, what? I was like, Tacoma, LA. cool, like, come. But we ended up bonding and like I feel like a sister poet, kindred spirit. I write about her in Thunder Song. In Taqʷšəblu's collection of poetry, Pocahontas, she is telling the story of moving through the world as a Maori woman. She's telling the story of the land and her lineage. There is a history of violence, of trauma, but she tethers herself to the strength of her ancestors. She's telling her histories, her people's teaching, but also her own stories of dancing to the Pussycat Dolls and falling in love with a Maori activist and wearing aviators in the club. There are so many ways you can let stories be your guide. In Kawai Strong Washburn's breathtaking book, Sharks in the Time of Saviors, the author pulls in ancient Hawaiian mythologies in order to tell a very contemporary story about the colonization of the islands and about climate change. So I talk about these two authors together because they're two of my favorite. Like if I had a top five, Sharks in the Time of Saviors and Pocahontas are definitely up there. One's a novel, one's a collection of poetry, but they're doing something similar to me where they're allowing themselves to be unapologetically indigenous. And they're like, yeah, like we're gonna write about this, but also write about this. And it's really beautiful. I wanna share a short excerpt from Pocahontas. Starry Nights in Nelson. My Nana is a wallflower, but a flower nonetheless. This means she is always being looked at at her expense. When she was born with a new kind of beauty, the type that truly ached in the 50s, brown skin stretched over white stalk bones. She had her father's height and his perfect, featureless features, set alight by the warmth of her mother's black sand eyes and hair. Hers was so long and so straight that it was dizzying to look at, like looking at the stars in a place where there is only sky and feeling awed but terrified by the great burning darkness. It's the kind of beauty that makes men crash cars, abandon wives, and launch ships. Unfortunately for her, all of this is very loud, and my Nana is a wallflower, but a flower nonetheless. So in thinking about stories that guide us, like I can't help but think of Taqʷšəblu's work and feel that kindred spirit and feel like, oh, you're writing about grandmas, I'm writing about grandma. Like, of course, like that's there. But I really do feel like her work is so impactful because she's tethering like herself to a story that is guiding her and teaching her and informing her as an Indigenous woman. So I feel like I have to say I grew up with the privilege of these things because I don't think a lot of us do. Like I feel like it was a gift to be able to grow up with my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and hear the language and hear stories. Like I didn't know that that was like a rare thing. I really didn't until she passed away, and I was like, wait, what? That's gone. Like, so I'm really, really grateful, and I think it's important to note that it's a privilege to have that. Some of us are not connected to our communities or our family, and so I want to say that. But so I grew up with our traditional stories, tribal legends, Coast Salish tradition of orating, and the passing down of knowledge. But there are all kinds of stories. Now it gets weird. Now we get to get a little weird. I was also obsessed with The Little Mermaid, as we see. So, oh, I have a whole thing. I should be reading that. So, yeah, Little Mermaid, Maiden of Deception Pass. I remember, I think it shows up in red paint, but I sat my great-grandma down as a child and recited the entire movie of the Little Mermaid to her, all the songs and everything, and she just sat there like, and I was like, cool, right? Anyway, but she sat me down and said, hey, like we have our own mermaid or ocean legend that you might really like, and told me the Maiden of Deception Pass, and I fell so in love with it and was like, oh, cool. So that's definitely a story that has guided me. I write about the Maiden of Deception Pass often. So when thinking of your own story, or in the context of what you might be working on or curious about writing now, who is someone or something that you might anchor yourself to? A place you might derive strength and inspiration from. In Red Paint, I chose to learn from the lives of the women who came before me, their personal history, their co-Salish teachings, their stories. I read historical documents, listened to audio recordings, read letters passed between cousins and old newspaper clippings, but I also listened to my mother's stories and my grandmother's and the elders in my community. There are so many different approaches to research and different ways to incorporate story. I want to share excerpts from a current essay, something that is in Thundersong, and something that became extremely difficult for me to navigate and write, but like Red Paint, I realized I just needed a little strength and guidance. I'm going to jump around a bit in this essay. I'm certainly not going to read the whole thing, but hopefully you'll get like a glimpse of the thing as a whole. And thinking about the stories that guide us. This story comes from Basket Ogress, Basket Woman. So this is an excerpt. Oops. Oh, I think I shared story or images earlier because my slideshow's chaos, but this is Basket Woman. And so this is a story I kept going back to and trying to like find the wisdom and the knowledge there. So this is from Basket Woman, which is in Thundersong. My great-grandmother told us stories by the fire. They always began this way. Al Tudi te Hawk, a long time ago. The first time I heard the Basket Ogre story, I was young. We were camping out at my great-grandparents' beach property on the peninsula. I remember the sword ferns casting shadows on our faces as we sat next to the crackling flames. We sat on split logs and damp earth. The trees towered in the distance. Beyond our circle, a ladder to the beach, then the sound of waves crashing. Around the fire, it was warm. A family bathed in amber light and the smell of cedar burning. But if you stepped outside of the circle, it was only shadows and darkness, trees bending and creaking. When I think about stories, specifically the stories that were my anchors, my safe harbor, it is impossible not to think of Basket Woman. As an Indigenous woman, the threat of disappearing is always there. It looms over us at all times. When I try to write about this feeling, I return to her. The following is another excerpt from Basket Woman. I saw a red dress hanging from the branches of a cedar tree near my home in Tacoma, Washington. It moved in the breeze like a ghost, like it was dancing. It was an eerie sight to behold, something that spooked me to the point of stillness. I watched it sway side to side. I imagined the body that once filled the fabric, could see her standing in the shadowy corner of a dimly lit gymnasium at a school dance, lonely and waiting for a partner that would never come. I saw her walking along Portland Avenue in the rain, something I've done many times, the wet pavement reflecting against the neon sign of the Puyallup Tribal Casino. I could not look at that dress without imagining the body's last movements, the final story of her, whoever she was. Red dresses have been hung up in tribal communities. This is to honor the missing and murdered Indigenous women, sisters, mothers, and daughters who are lost and not found. They don't get lengthy news stories or headlines. We get empty, fabric in shades of red. It's hard not to want more, not to demand national attention. When I remember the dress hanging in the tree, I see my niece's face. She is 12, and once, after a night of junk food and cartoons, I drove her home across the reservation, just around the corner to my sister's place. I dropped her off in the parking lot and watched her take the steps up to her apartment 2 at a time beneath the flickering streetlight. I pulled away, and before I made it home, she called me, "Auntie, the door is locked. I can't get in." I hadn't waited long enough. My heart fell into my stomach and my face flushed with panic and tears. I flipped around in the middle of the road, angry at how stupid I had been, how I left a child I loved alone in the night. I sped all the way back and found her on the curb and took her home, apologizing the entire way. The fear lingered as I lay awake in my bed long after my niece was asleep in the guest room. It was all-consuming. I began to wonder if it was the place that generated this anxiety. This is the east side of Tacoma. This is the reservation. We are close to the casino. We are close to the interstate. Would I have felt the same way if we were tucked into the brightly manicured lawns of a wealthy Seattle suburb? Would I have lost my breath the same way if my niece had been locked out of a large house in a gated community where every house had an alarm system? But that isn't our reality. Safety is something we have to work for. I went to bed plagued with fear and guilt. I dreamt that night of a tribal story, one I could recite from memory. In my dream, I was chasing my niece through our dark neighborhood. But as I ran after her, stretching my hands out, she was always just out of reach. That's when I noticed something was behind me. I heard heavy footsteps, smelled sap and fire smoke. I turned to face the thing that was stalking me, but woke just before Basket Woman came into view. Altudi Tuhak. A long time ago, there was a basket woman, and I am grateful for the story, for the words our grandmothers chose, for knowing the fear of going missing might actually teach us something. I ask you now to consider your own story, the story you are trying to make sense of. There is no way I could have felt safe in the research I was doing without Basket Woman. To consider missing and murdered Indigenous women is to consider my niece's safety, my own safety. In listening and re-listening to the stories of Basket Woman, I felt held by something bigger than myself. I felt guided by the teachings inherent in my great-grandmother's stories. I discovered something about Basket Woman. She was never a villain, rather a protector. Incorporating her story into the work I was doing the only way I could. That's a weird sentence. It's a typo. Incorporating her story into the work I was doing was the only way I could go on, that I could stick with it. Because sometimes when our stories go so dark, it's important to find the light necessary in telling them any way that we can, and not to let them become our undoing. What is your story? What is the thing you can tether yourself to when you are considering the ways you have been made to feel unsafe? I use stories from my own lineage. Who can teach you how to feel safe? What can you learn from them? I have like so many other slides. So, Basket Ogress, Basket Woman, like that story really lent itself well. Like it was a hard thing to do as a Coast Salish woman, as a survivor of sexual abuse and assault. Like it was hard for me to engage with those facts and that story. And I was like, there's no way I can write about this. But the Basket Ogress story really the more I sat with it and the more I thought of it, it really helped me and guided me. But I don't want to just focus on the stories that I had access to and what were for me. I also want to talk about, I got really into Greek mythology, the sirens. I'm obsessed with mermaids. I'm a water person. So in thinking about mythologies and stories that can kind of anchor us, like folklore, fairy tale mythology is also something. I was really into mermaids, to sirens, Persephone. It opened up this whole. It was like a gateway into mythology that I didn't know anything about. I was also a huge nerd, and I was super into The Last Unicorn, and this movie, Legend, because there was unicorns in it. Like, it was a whole thing. And I've never written about this in a way, but I'm sure, just to get us thinking about craft and about storytelling, there are things that can teach us stuff, right? So maybe what is your thing? What is something that you were really I don't know. I feel like I'm forgetting so many fairy tales right now, but unicorns, super cool, fantasy. And I also want to talk about different kinds of intergenerational stories. So this is a really meaningful, these slides, this is a book that my mother gifted to me when I think I was 9. And this is an image, the first image is her book that she had in the 70s that she was gifted when she was the same age. And then the other one is the one she gave me when I was 9. And it's one of the first books I remember loving. And it was cute. My mom was like, oh, the girl on the cover, also I read this book as a kid, but the girl on the cover reminded me of you. And I was like, that's really nice. But then the book is punk. I don't know if anyone has read that. It's a deep cut. But she's an orphan who runs away and squats a cottage in the woods, learns how to garden and take care of herself. I was like, this book is so punk. So we have Jill LaPointe to thank for planting that seed. But thinking about stories that were also passed down to you, I shared the Coast Salish stories, stories I heard growing up, but also there's different kinds of stories that are gifted to you, like this. So thinking about that is really special and can open up stuff. Also, unexpected, unlikely mythologies, right? The mythology of Twin Peaks is so important to me. It literally has its own magic and ritual and character in red paint, I think. And that's because it meant something. It meant a lot to me. It was incredible as a teenager to see. I remember friends who weren't even originally from Seattle being like, oh, you've seen Twin Peaks, right? And I was like, no, what? And they're like, it's filmed where it's from your backyard. And I was like, whoa. So it was really cool. It literally, now I think it's changing, but back then it was the first time I saw giant old growth and gloomy skies and terrible shitty diners and logging trucks. And I was like, that looks like my neighborhood. And so to me, the mythology of Twin Peaks is something I pull from, right? And it's a story that guides me. Also, thinking about what mythic creatures you might gravitate towards and thinking about telling our own stories. One of my favorite exercises is when I'm in a writing workshop or teaching a class of new intro to creative writing students. I think about everyone's like, okay, I want to write a memoir. I want to write about this experience or this memory. And I was like, cool. Is it hard memory? And they're like, yeah. I was really sad. It was rooted in grief. It's a hard memory. Thank you. And I'm like, okay, here's the thing. Here's the trick. Here's the little hack. Is that what they call it? I was like, think of that really hard memory that you want to write about, but it is hard or perhaps disempowered. Or I was like, what if you told the story in a persona of your favorite mythological creature? It's so fun, and the things that come out of this are wild. So some of my favorites are obviously vampires, gothy. So the mythic meets personal narrative prompt. If folks who are interested in writing and want to go explore and experiment with your own story, here's a little narrative or a prompt I'll leave you with. The mythic meets personal narrative prompt. Think of a memory, an important experience in your life, or something you've been interested in exploring in your writing. What legend or lore can you pull into this narrative? What mythic creature or fable can you align with this story? So think of that. It's fun. It's actually just really fun to do. Oh, God, I really go into it. So my example was Basket Woman, but also like mermaids, sirens, banshees, werewolves, ghosts, witches, monsters, fairies. So many things, right? I'm sure there's things that I'm not even thinking of. Video game characters, sci-fi. And also thinking about the stories that guided me through red paint absolutely had to do with the women that came before me. So I want to quickly talk about that. I know we only have a couple minutes left. Wow, I'm usually so fast, and this has been so slow. I'm sorry. I'm like, So I talk a lot about Kamsha Kohalowish and Aunt Susie Sampson Peter. So going back to my lineage and learning from these women that had so much strength and resilience, they had like everything to do with why I was even able to get to red paint and do that. But I want to talk about, I was talking to a student about this recently where they were like, I don't know my ancestors. And they were a Native student, but that were like, I've been removed, I was like, sometimes that's not always an option. And I wanted to honor that. And she'd be like, this incredible poet, her name is Anastasia Renee, said, well, what about just like writer ancestors? And I was like, what does that mean? And she was like, someone that you're just really inspired by. If we don't have connection to our ancestors, if our family history has been taken from us, because that happens, that has happened. She was like, who can you connect to that inspires you and guides you? And I loved this so much. This is a really beautiful book by The Man Who Could Move Clouds, where she's talking, like, going into her, the history of her family and what she's basically using her her lineage and her story to tell her contemporary narrative. But again, what if I don't have a direct connection to my lineage? What if there is no family member? Think of a historical figure you might feel a kindred spirit to. Think of someone who fascinates you. Think of someone you've always wanted to know more about. They can be famous or they can be your next door neighbor. One of my favorite writers, Deborah Magpie Erling, who wrote Perma Red, which is top 5 favorite books, wrote The Lost Journals of Sacagawea. It's a novel, so it's not memoir, but she's doing the same thing. She dove into the story and research of Sacagawea to tell her story. Casey Parks is a writer who wrote this really beautiful memoir, Diary of a Misfit. And Casey Parks chose a stranger, a neighbor who lived next to her grandmother in a small southern town in the 50s and lived life as a man. And Casey Parks went and just interviewed her grandmother and people all around the town and found these journals, diaries, to tell a story and to tell her own story about what it was like to come out as a queer person in a deeply religious community. So who can help you tell your story? Right? I think of I'm obsessed with Frida Kahlo. Who are your these people that inspire you, and something about what they do or what they put in the world is guiding and beautiful. Think of that. Because you can connect to their story and do a deep dive into research and find out all about them, their favorite food, their astrological sign. A famous artist, a radical, a local legend, a mysterious stranger. So whoever you choose, an ancestor, a historical figure, a stranger, they should be someone you feel you can learn more about your own story, the story you're trying to tell, through learning more about their life and their experiences. What can they teach you? How can they help guide your story? So think about this, hopefully, as you leave here tonight. For the writers in the room, hopefully that's all of you. But think about, like, who is your person? Who is this person that can guide you? Describe them. This is a prompt. I'm giving you homework. Make a list of 3 things you know about them. Make a list of 3 things you want to know about them. How does their story weave into your own? And that is I didn't even get to read from my book. I'm so sorry, but I hope that that was interesting and cool. Thank you so much.
All right, that was a great round of applause, but let's do it again. Another round of applause. Because she's awesome, right? Right? Okay. Thank you for doing that. I also want to give another special thanks to the Hotel Leo for all the support they provided throughout this event, sometimes in a moment's notice. We have time now for questions, and I have the questions here. We've heard the many writers you love to read now. What were your favorite books growing up, besides The Little Mermaid?
Well, and The Last Unicorn and Mandy. Mandy is a banger, everyone. If folks who have children, it's a beautiful book. But beyond that, I really loved, oh God, this is also so expected, but Sylvia Plath,
Ooh.
Ariel, The Bell Jar, those.
Yeah.
Oh, this is fun. I also really loved, when I was really little, before I got into like cool things like poems and stuff, I really liked, do you guys remember Goosebumps? Like, I love that. I was like, those were my first, like, some of my first books, like reading the like spooky stories. And then I think those were for like elementary school. But then when we got into middle school, it was Fear Street. And that was like spooky, but like they made out and stuff. It was weird. Like, it was like, oh, it's like beach massacre. Blah, blah. I don't know why I was so drawn to like violent things, but it was fun. That was weird. That was weird. I'm tired.
No judgment.
But I loved those gothy, spooky stories.
That's awesome. So would you say that is your favorite genre to read?
No, I don't mess with. I'm a baby now. I can barely watch horror movies. Like my partner will be like, "Let's watch a scary movie," and I was like, "No." Like I'm gonna have nightmares for like 8 weeks. No, I think my favorite genre now is. Oh, I don't have one actually. It's poetry. It's lyric and hybrid forms. I read it. Yeah, I don't have a favorite genre. I love all of it. I'm weird.
So would you ever write in that genre of that you haven't written in yet? Would you do the horror? Would you do the yeah? Awesome.
I would try.
The next book.
I'm in awe of fiction writers. Whoever in the room who is a fiction writer, I'm so in awe of you. I love that. Like, I want to. Like, that'll be. I feel like I have to work up to that, but like, yeah, I really want to write a novel.
I think you can do it. Right? Definitely got voice and lyricism down. So plus the scene, place.
I have a really hard time with like just the logistical things though, and the experiments I've done with fiction. They're like the feedback, the critique has been, Sasha, she just has to go from the woods back to the yard. Just do that. And I was like, but how do I word that? How do I? And they're like, oh my God, it's not a poem. It's not, you have to just get her from the backyard to the front door. And I was like, I can't. So anyone who wants to tutor me, I'm here for it.
We might have to talk later.
Yes, please.
Did you write the first part of your book from journals you kept as a teenager? Oh, do tell.
Is this from a personal, someone knows me? Parts of Little Boats and obviously what became red paint. I actually have, these silly like big journals that were part collage and doodle and writing, and some of like there's literally a line by line thing that was both in Little Boats and red paint that was from that journal. So someone knows, like, wow. Yes.
Short, sweet, I like it. So talk some about the red paint tradition, what it means to you and to others, to whatever level you're comfortable with.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like I can only talk about what it means to me, and that in respectfully. When I was first talking to my mom and learning about red paint, it was really impactful. It was really moving. It was really grounding for me. It was during the time that I became deeply, what's the word? Unwell. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I was hospitalized a couple times. It was a bummer of a time. And red paint came up, and when my mom and I were talking about it, she was like, explained it to me that my Uncle Ron, whose paintings hang in my living room, danced in the longhouse and wore red paint, as did several of my ancestors who came before him. And my mom was like, you come from this lineage of red paint. Like, they were the medicine workers in the longhouse ceremony. They were the healers. Like, you come from that. And I will never, like, I'm not gonna go into the longhouse, obviously, but she was like, just know that you come from that, and you have the ability to heal. And that literally changed my path and helped me heal.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Next, what advice do you have for educators working with youth who may be struggling?
To listen to them and to give them space. Like, I feel like I got to work with high school students for the first time a couple years ago through this incredible artist friend. I feel like all of my stories are real rambly. But a dear friend of mine who's an artist and painter, I got to work with high school students, and I was so scared. I was like, high schoolers are mean. I was like, they're gonna, like, I was so scared, but it was one of my favorite teaching opportunities ever. By the end of our like 6-week summer program, I was crying in a good way, hugging them. They did this beautiful spoken word project. And I think that at first, high schoolers are kind of mean and scary. No offense. But just being patient and letting them, like, making sure that you like pipe down to let them talk and let them feel comfortable, because once that happens, they're in it. They're like on board. So is that even advice? But like kind of honor them and let them be themselves and yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree with that for sure. Can you imagine 6 weeks hanging out with this one?
It was fun.
Yeah, right? Okay. So, what annoys you about white culture in relation to your indigenous self? No pressure.
Wow.
We will be finding you after the session.
Like, you owe me a snack and a drink. This
At
is
least.
what? But also, thank you. It's both. I'm like, whoa. What? I have to think with. I have to. Okay. So many things. Like. But if I have to choose one, The expectation that we can only be at one note. I talked about this earlier in my craft talk, where at Northwest Indian College, but like, I don't want to tell the whole story again, but the fact that the Native experience, like an editor requesting like, oh, Sasha, I want you to talk about being Native. And I'm like, well, maybe I want to talk about being in a rowdy punk show in a basement, or I want to talk about going on a road trip and like shopping at TJ Maxx, or whatever I want to talk about is still a Native experience. And so one of the things that is really hard is that, oh, you're going to talk about salmon and your grandmother. I'm like, yes, yes, I am. But I'm also going to talk about, burlesque and TJ Maxx or French fries. I don't know. Like, all of that gets to be the Native experience. And I think that it's changing and shifting in a really beautiful way. Like, obviously, we're having more stories come forward in not just like memoir and the literary world, but also like shows and pop culture and film. And so I think that that's changing. But that's one of the hardest things, like, oh, you're a Native, you better make me sad. It's like, what?
So on point. Thank you for that. That was awesome. Okay. So, where do you and where did you find your strength? Family, friends, tradition, anything, all?
All of the above, like definitely that research, going into those stories helped me. So did joining a band. When I needed to take a break from writing, I did. And I just bartended and waited tables and joined a band and went on tour. And that helped me find so much strength. Also, like conversations and walks with my mom, like my friends, my partner, like, yeah, all of that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So this question is from an EMDR therapist. How did your therapy assist you in your DID recovery?
I had this moment where when I was diagnosed with PTSD and having a really hard time, the first time I had an EMDR, I also called it MDMA once, and they were like, no, that's not. I was like trying to tell my teacher, like a professor, I was like, no, but I went to MDMA therapy, and he was like, I don't think that's right. So yeah, EMDR. But I remember that being massively helpful for me because as someone who, not to go dark, but I wrote kind of a dark memoir, so it's okay, we're all safe here. Telling that story over and over and like, hold on. One of my first sessions in an EMDR session, I was, for folks who know the story, disassociating is a thing, and it was a really hard thing for me, and it was something I wasn't aware of until things got too bad. And so in one of my first sessions, I feel really lucky to have worked with this person, but they were like, okay, I want you to tell me the story of this thing, like a really hard thing, like one of your trauma stories. And I was like, okay. And I told it to them, like just stone cold, like just like, this happened. And they're like, okay, now tell me while doing these movements and doing this thing. And I was like, okay. So anyway, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what is that? What did you just do? Like, and that was such a huge, like it forced me to, I hope I'm talking about this right. It's my personal experience.
Exactly.
It brought me into my body in a way that when I told a story that I had recited and said so many times and felt like desensitized and a little checked out of, when I told it in that way, I was like, oh my God, like someone help me, like, but in a good way. And they did. And we worked together for a year and got to a really good place. That was so personal. Wow, sorry. But that was honest, and I'm thankful for it.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Your writing craft talk workshop today was so helpful and well received. Is there somewhere else you teach so folks could learn more from you? Hope, 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 hope.
I teach at the Native Pathways program at Evergreen and Olympia, and I love it so much. Like, it gives me life. So I teach creative writing there. I also teach in their core faculty. I love it. It's great. And sometimes I have the opportunity to teach workshops one-off here and there. But yeah, I'm teaching at Evergreen Native Pathways program. It's a really great program.
That's wonderful. I'm sure there's some university folks out there. I know that I'll be talking to my administration about bringing her in for a workshop. What do you think?
I would love to.
Okay. What do you think is one of the most important, helpful lessons you learned in school or outside of school?
That's such a huge question. This was outside of school. I don't know if folks know this about me, but I dropped out of alternative high school. Alternative high school. Like, who does that? So academia wasn't a place that I felt super comfortable in for most of my life. I'm really stoked and so grateful that I ended up at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and then eventually, got my MFA. Turns out I loved school when it was in the right. It's like, find your people. I don't know. If you would have told me at 17, oh, you're actually going to graduate not only high school but college and get a master's, I would have laughed in your face and been like, that's weird. There's no way that's happening. But I think what helped me was being in a classroom that felt safe and that was inviting and that had the folks in that room, whether we were from different backgrounds, different nations, it was still inviting and safe and welcoming. I really thrived. That was a big lesson for me. I didn't think I was gonna answer the academic way, but I'm gonna say that. That was a lesson that I was like, oh, I'm not bad at this, or I don't not belong here. I just needed to find the right place.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Well, I know I was not able to get through all the questions, but that's all the time we have right now. Another round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha taqʷšəblu LaPointe, for such a wonderful presentation this evening. I know you're all excited to start reading the 2025 Whatcom Reads, right? It is a Whatcom Reads tradition to have the author of this year's book reveal the name of the next year's book. Sasha, will you please do the honors?
This is so exciting. Also, y'all just made me cry in public. Thank you. Love it. So, you may have heard the phrase, no two persons ever read the same book, that every reader brings their own personal perspectives that flavor their understanding of and appreciation for particular titles. The 2025 Whatcom Reads title is a celebration of reading and how we all see things from different points of view. A series of interconnected stories traces the path of a book titled Theo and the impact it has on its various readers, in a charming, surprising, graceful tale that has something in it for readers of all kinds. I am pleased to announce that the 2025 Whatcom Reads title will be No Two Persons by Port Townsend, love Port Townsend, author Erica Bauermeister. The Whatcom Writes prompt will be The Book That Changed My Life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Let's have one final round of applause for Sasha.